Over 100 years ago, a child was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He would grow up to be one of the most extraordinary writers of the 20th century. Generations of readers, both old and young, have thrilled to his stories and the worlds he imagined. His name was Clive Staples Lewis, and he became the man who created the magical world of Narnia. The Narnia books have sold millions of copies around the world, and yet to some, they're a total puzzle. They've been criticized as a hodgepodge, a mishmash, a random collection of odd characters and events with no rhyme, reason, or literary sense. So what was C.S. Lewis thinking? Was it just a case of bad writing, or is there something deeper underneath? Something hidden?
The intriguing thing about the Narnia books is that something there doesn't quite add up. And however much you try to make sense of it, there's a missing component, quite clearly.
And here it is. It exists. Someone has found it, and now we're taking pictures of it, and it's on page 1 of the newspapers, as it should be. This is a great discovery.
For some reason, this has come to me first, but it doesn't really matter that it's come to me first. The only thing I've got to do with it is share it with people.
Michael Ward is a man with a mission. He thinks he has cracked the Narnia Code.
It was a real discovery. It was a genuine literary secret.
If he is correct, this could be the most fascinating piece of literary archaeology in recent years.
How do the students react?
They are fascinated. You can see their jaws dropping. There are audible gasps as they realise that there is more to Narnia than they ever dreamt of.
That's fantastic.
But could it really be true that a trusted writer such as C.S. Lewis would deliberately hide a crucial layer of meaning deep within his best-loved books? In this film, we intend to find out.
I told my PhD supervisor about this discovery, and he said to me, in 20 years' time, you will still be known as the man who discovered the code to Narnia, and you will be sick of it. But I'm not sick of it yet.
But before we can understand the puzzle, we should understand the man. So just who was C.S. Lewis?
C.S. Lewis was a literary critic, a literary historian, a cultural critic, a journalist, a book reviewer, a broadcaster, an apologist, a fantasist, a novelist, a very, very great lecturer.
Clive Staples Lewis was clearly a multi-talented and highly gifted individual. But what were the experiences and influences which made a man capable of producing not only Narnia itself, but also a multi-layered code within it?
For C.S. Lewis, childhood was a very happy time. It was happy for all kinds of reasons. He had an idyllic childhood. Just outside of Belfast, he had a brother who he loved and got on with really closely. He had a nurse who was a wonderful storyteller who bred in him a fascination with myth and legend. He had an eccentric dad who was a wonderful, amazing character. He had a very loving mother, and he lived in a house full of books. What better place for a child who was destined to grow up to be a writer than to live in a house that was absolutely stacked to the rafters with books?
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Home life, family life, especially his mother and brother at that early age, before he was 10 years old, plus his imaginative life, were quite enough for him.
For a long, long time to come.
It was above all safe, mother and father and his older brother, but it was also very free. Now, this combination of freedom and safety is a wonderful thing. And that's what he had there, especially with his mother and his brother.
And what did he live on? That's enough for now.
But Mama...
No.
For Lewis, his mother was everything. She was certainty, she was assuredness. She was, he said, like a continent. She was like the rock on which his life was established. And then, overnight, she sank.
At the age of 9, Lewis was about to face the most defining moment of his young life. It was an event from which he would never truly recover. His mother died of cancer on the 23rd of August, 1908. Lewis's father was not cut out to be a single parent. He soon sent his young son away to follow his brother to a dreadful school in England. The sudden loss of both mother and family would affect any child deeply. For C.S. Lewis, the effect was devastating.
It was a terrible loss. Of course, it's a terrible loss to lose your mother at an early age, and in Lewis's case, it was compounded by the fact that he was sent away from home, and he withdrew ever more deeply, I think, into a private world, a self-protected world. His life became more and more compartmentalized, and he developed a habit of concealment, he said, with his father, and I think it bred in him a kind of secretiveness, an ability to keep secrets.
After years of misery in formal education, Lewis was sent to a private tutor called W.T. Kirkpatrick, known to some as the Great Knock.
Lewis Kirkpatrick, known as Knock.
Ah, good to meet you.
If you think of C.S. Lewis arriving at the home of this man, a man who is wise in language, in literature, who takes this boy and says, you don't understand anything. I'm going to tell you everything that there is to know, and it's up to you whether you want to believe it or accept it. That's your choice. You know, C.S. Lewis called it red beef and strong beer that he got when he visited W.T. Kirkpatrick, and at the end of his first week there was writing home to say that this was going to be the most amazing time of all his life, and it was.
Socrates makes an error of logic when he concludes that if you mistake your enemy for your friend, it is right to help your enemy.
But that doesn't invalidate his main point.
Prove it.
Lewis began to lap this up because Knock, the Great Knock, was a relentless dialectician. You had to define your terms, apply it to the real world, and draw conclusions only if those two things matched. And if there was any foggy thinking at all, or any abstraction, any platitude or cliche or slogans, he would chop you down immediately.
He learned a great deal, but what he learned above all was argumentation, dialectic, debate, and he discovered that he was quite good at it.
I think Lewis was probably an argumentatively disposed man before Knock. After Knock, he became an argumentative man. The disposition just blossomed.
The Great Knock taught Lewis not only how to argue, but also really how to think and how to write clearly. And the rigor of the Great Knock's teaching means that the idea that Lewis could ever write randomly or lazily or carelessly or in a slapdash, hodgepodge sort of way, that just doesn't hold water.
Kirkpatrick was also a determined atheist, and atheism was a position which Lewis was increasingly happy to share. Literature and learning now dominated his life, and he soon gained a place at Oxford University. He arrived just as the world went mad.
The front was the nightmare that everyone says, and Lewis was cast into the middle of it. He was a frontline soldier.
In the war, he remains an atheist, saw this enormous bloodshed of trench warfare, bowels flooding the earth, wading in blood, and he saw this. He saw people blown up next to him. And yet he says, I never sunk so low as to pray.
Lewis was an atheist at this time, and he found that the world as he saw it was pretty meaningless. Insofar as there was any meaning, the only meanings he could find in nature, the world around him, were meanings of cruelty, brutality, and bleakness. It was really the depths of hell.
But when Lewis gets back to Oxford, he is not only older and more war-worn than his fellow undergraduates, he is someone who feels that he has earned his skepticism. He has earned his pessimism. He's probably at this point philosophically closer to the Great Knock than he had ever been before and that he ever would be again. He is a skeptic to the point of cynicism. And undergraduates' excitement about the possibilities of life strike him as a kind of cheap romanticism because they haven't been through what he's been through. Nevertheless, what sets him apart from many others who are equally skeptical philosophically is his immense love of learning and his delight in learning. And that led to his being extraordinarily successful. He gets a double first, focusing on philosophy. Philosophy is his prime area. And what he finds out at that point is that he doesn't have a philosophy. And this proves to be somewhat difficult for him. He discovers that he doesn't know how to respond to student papers because he doesn't have a clear philosophical position from which to judge their work. So he starts thinking about metaphysical questions. He starts thinking about religion. He wonders whether there could be some sort of being responsible for the world. And his hardcore atheism begins to soften.
Lewis's lack of belief was about to come under attack from a new group of friends and Christian thinkers. Among them was a young J.R.R. Tolkien.
It was his friendship with Tolkien that did more than anything else to push him over the edge, from first unbelief, then to this kind of vague, almost pantheistic idealism, and then ultimately to belief in a supernatural God. It was a long walk that he had with Tolkien and another friend along the river next to Magdalen College that led to his coming to affirm that there is a personal God who made this world and who sustains it.
Yes, but it's still a myth.
Lewis's path to faith was one he most certainly did not want to take. But finally, it was his intellectual honesty which made him face up to the God he so sincerely wished was not there. In the end, he reluctantly gave in and surrendered to the Christian God, becoming, as he later said, perhaps the most reluctant convert in the whole of England. But that moment changed his life forever and set him on a journey of faith that would lead him to Narnia and beyond.
I think that he was filled with a sense of gratitude for being forgiven. And that sense of gratitude was a very, very powerful impulse in him, I think, for the rest of his life.
His conversion was really the hinge about which his whole life turned. He changed. He became a Christian and a person very keen to share his Christian faith with other people. So as the years pass and he becomes a writer and the books pour forth from his pen, he's constantly trying to defend and explain and immerse people in what it feels like to live within a Christian universe. And he becomes steadily more famous for doing so.
Lewis's books ranged from Christian apologetics to science fiction. He was also a highly respected author on medieval literature. As the years passed, Lewis took to meeting with like-minded writers to discuss their work. They called themselves the Inklings.
He's a man who is assured, set in his ways already. He's a man who has academic standing. He's written academic books. He's respected by his peers, certainly respected and admired by his students. And he has a strong Christian faith.
Right. Who's first out of the stocks?
Not for me.
Barfield, how about you?
Oh, not today, if you don't mind.
Oh, not today. Anybody got any? Tolkien, how about you?
Well, I have actually been working on my manuscript. Oh, what a surprise! Two interesting new characters coming through. Oh, no, Chollas, not another bloody elf. You can cover your ears if you want. I may do just that. Dark is the morning that awaits us, said Aragorn.
Many great books came out of these simple weekly gatherings, but more and more it was C.S. Lewis who rose to the attention of the public. Already a well-known medievalist and author, he was soon asked by the BBC to give a series of wartime broadcasts on the Christian faith. These were a huge success, and soon Lewis was in danger of being swamped by fame and endless correspondence.
Go on, Jack.
But there was still one more talent to emerge. He became an unbeatable defender of the faith in public debates.
He had all of the skills that a great debater needed, and he had them in abundance, and he knew that. And so when a little group called the Socratic Club began in Oxford for the specific purpose of debating Christianity in a group which was supposed to include both believers and non-believers, Lewis became the central figure. He was not the president of the club formally, but he was the prime mover behind it.
Lewis was in the habit of inviting along guest atheists to a debating club he ran in Oxford, and he would trounce them to the delight of all onlookers. But he made the mistake of inviting Elizabeth Anscombe, who was not only a Christian herself, but a very, very serious philosopher who'd been reading 20th century philosophers like Wittgenstein, who Lewis had been too much in the Middle Ages to have really thought about. And instead of him trouncing her, she trounced him and made him rethink very seriously his sense that he had a watertight argument in favour of the insufficiency of this world and the necessity of others.
So we don't know for sure exactly how hard this was on him. I'm inclined to think not so hard in itself, but it came at a time when his belief in his own powers of argument and his energy were at a low ebb. And I think that as part of a much larger picture in which he was being worn down to the nub, it does have some significance, and it does help to explain his turn to writing children's books.
My understanding is that Lewis then turned to the imaginative creation of other worlds as a kind of potent demonstration of his viewpoint. He abandoned argument for creation, for the concrete demonstration of something.
Others were not so generous. When word got round that the almighty Lewis had been beaten in open debate, many thought his famous faith must now be in retreat, a view supported by the news that Lewis's next book was going to be a fairy tale.
One thing I think it's really worth emphasising is that Lewis didn't retreat as a result of the debate with Anscombe. On the contrary, he advanced into story and was able, in his stories, to communicate the idea of a meaning-drenched universe present at every level of the story, which was why it was so exciting making this discovery and finally finding the key which unlocked the creative intentions behind these beautifully worked novels.
When The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was first published, it was dismissed by many as childish and superficial. Some critics were very close to home.
No, Jack, it really won't do. What? Santa Claus and a talking lion in the same book?
He thought the book, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, was absolutely dreadful. It violated all of Tolkien's principles. It was vitally important to Tolkien that a fantasy world be very clearly and absolutely distinct from our world. And he considered Lewis to be essentially playing with his toys.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that Tolkien is a jerk. Just kidding.
He was biased. He was a wonderful man. They were wonderful friends, and yet they were so different.
He didn't really have the capacity to enjoy what Lewis was doing. And he wasn't interested in it. It wasn't what made him tick. And it's very funny to think that these two super geniuses who were friends, who shared this Christian faith, Tolkien figured in Lewis's conversion, to think that of all the people on the planet, Tolkien wasn't able to appreciate what Lewis was doing is in itself extremely entertaining and fascinating.
There's some aspects of the Narnia books that, the writing is, it's serviceable, but it's not excellent, all right? In other ways, they're extraordinary. I mean, and that's why millions of people have read these books and have been moved by them and laughed and passed them on to their children.
The intriguing thing about the Narnia books is that something there doesn't quite add up. And however much you try to make sense of it, there's a missing component, quite clearly.
The remarkable thing about these books, we take it for granted, is their survival, their continued popularity, the fact that they're never out of print. There's barrow loads of other books written, with vaguely magical themes around the same time, which we've never heard of, and, which lasted a year or two. So it's been fair for scholars to say, why is this? And I think scholars have felt there must be something to account for the experience of satisfying progression and coherence that we have, in spite of the fact that outwardly it seems to be so disparate, and Tolkien famously thought it was an hodgepodge. So I think that's led some scholars to look.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have read many times. I mean, I love Lewis, and I've read many times that somebody was thinking that each of the 7 books corresponded to one of the 7 deadly sins, or to one of the sacraments, or to this or to that, and it always seemed somehow artificial or hollow or strained or forced.
So when Michael Ward came along and claimed that they were in fact representative of the 7 planets, I thought, oh my goodness, another one of these ridiculous theories that attempts to explain everything by reference to one single secret key.
And is that what you think now?
No, I think he's right. And I've never been more surprised in my life.
The moment that I heard it, my heart stopped. I said, that's it.
It feels, well, it feels amazing to have been the one to have discovered this thing. And as I say, I wasn't looking for it. It just fell into my lap one night. And it's really a great privilege to have discovered it first.
If Michael Ward is correct, his discovery could revolutionize our view of Lewis as a writer. But more than that, it could even challenge our view of God, man, and the universe. At the time of his discovery, however, he was just an ordinary Cambridge student studying for a PhD on C.S. Lewis, when one night, something happened.
This is my room at Ridley Hall, Theological College in Cambridge, where I had my eureka moment back in February 2003. Well, I was lying in bed one night reading Lewis's long poem about the planets, and when I got to the lines about Jupiter, one of the things I read was that Jupiter brings about winter past and guilt forgiven. Just that phrase leapt off the page at me, and I thought, that's as good a 5-word summary of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe as you might ask to meet. Winter past and guilt forgiven. So that was what kind of connected Jupiter in my mind with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And the more I looked at the Jupiter imagery in this poem, the more I seemed to be reading a summary of the book. And then I thought to myself, there are another 6 planets and another 6 Narnia Chronicles. Perhaps they all match up. And it was pretty easy to see that they did. I was stunned. I leapt out of bed, in my pyjamas, went over to the bookcase, started pulling my Lewis books off the shelves, chasing links from work to work, looking at how it all might have played out. And it was amazing. These books have been known by millions of people for 50 years. And why has this fallen in my lap, this discovery? Because I instinctively knew that it was a real discovery. It wasn't just an idea, a kind of theory that I was imposing upon the books. It was a real discovery. It was a genuine literary secret.
But how far down does this secret go? And how exactly does it work out in Lewis's writing?
It's a secret 3 layers deep. The first layer is the simple fairy tale layer, which a 5-year-old could understand. The second layer is the various biblical parallels, which again are fairly obvious. But the third layer, the secret layer, the fundamental layer, came from the planets. Lewis turned the planets into plots. He turned these symbols into stories. And it's that layer which undergirds and irradiates each novel at a level which escapes your conscious notice, but which Lewis deliberately, intentionally, but secretly put there to inform the whole Narnian universe as it is represented in each book. So it's this third layer, which is, if you like, the cosmically significant layer. This was the reason he wrote Narnia, to communicate the idea of a meaning-drenched universe. Lewis, of course, was not a professional writer of children's books or a professional defender of the faith. He was an academic. He was a medieval literary historian. And as a professor of this medieval and Renaissance period, he was obviously incredibly learned and expert in the old view of the cosmos, which had 7 planets. And he loved these planets. He describes them as spiritual symbols of permanent value, which are especially worthwhile in our own generation.
As his research continued, Michael Ward was amazed at the deep and detailed way each planet fitted each Narnia book. He was convinced. The time had come to go public. A book must be written, and to help prepare the manuscript, Michael Ward came here to Wheaton College, Illinois. It may seem strange to find a perfect Cotswold cottage in the suburbs of modern-day Chicago, but this is America, and Americans adore C.S. Lewis. The Wade Center here on the Wheaton campus also happens to be an excellent resource for anyone writing a book on Lewis, and they've thought of just about everything.
This is the Wade Center at Wheaton College, which is a purpose-built study center and archive. It's got a number of pieces of furniture from Lewis's home in Oxford, the Kilns, including this wardrobe, one of many Lewis family wardrobes, and a sign saying "Enter at your own risk." So I'm not going to do that.
After much work, the book, now called Planet Narnia, was nearing completion. If Michael Ward's theories were correct, the planets were at the absolute center of the Narnia Chronicles. They were not just decoration, but the very heart of the idea itself. So how did it all begin? What was that very first creative spark that set alight the whole idea of Narnia in Lewis's mind?
Lewis himself once said that the whole story began with a picture of a faun in a snowy wood carrying parcels. And snow, in Lewis's imagination, almost invariably is connected with the influence of Saturn, the planet of coldness and death and old age, the worst planet. On the other side of the picture you have the faun carrying the parcels, the Christmas parcels. And Christmas is, again, continually associated in Lewis's mind with Jupiter. That's why Father Christmas appears in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Even though, technically speaking, in strict logic, there can be no Christmas in Narnia because they don't know of a character called Christ. So as he looked at this image, he began to tease out the saturnine from the jovial imagery and turned it into a story. He turned this symbolism into a story. He turned the planets into plots.
That may sound simple enough as an idea, but how does it play out in each Narnia story?
The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is the Jupiter story, because Jupiter was the king, the best planet, the one who brought winter to an end. Winter past and guilt forgiven, to quote Lewis's poem about Jupiter. Jupiter was associated in Lewis's mind with the sacrifice of Christ because of Jupiter's red spot, the great red eye on Jupiter, which Lewis associated with Christ's sacrificial blood, which is why Aslan dies and rises again in that first Narnia Chronicle. Prince Caspian is the Mars story. Mars, as everybody knows, is the god of war, and Prince Caspian is the Narnian war story, the civil war of Narnia, the great war of deliverance, as it's called in a later book. Military events and escapades and descriptions are everywhere in this story. It's a story of boys hardening into knights. But one perplexing thing about Prince Caspian is that other major theme of imagery that runs through it, which has to do with trees and forests. Lucy tries to wake the trees. Aslan enters the story amongst dancing trees, and the trees come to the battle at the end of the book. Why all these trees? Is it just evidence of Lewis's imaginative confusion, or just a hearty envelopment of all rich things without any governing purpose? No, it's another aspect of the martial symbolism. Mars, in addition to being the god of war, was associated with trees and forests. He was a vegetation deity originally. He was called Mars Silvanus. And that's why Lewis puts Sylvans into his cast list in Prince Caspian. They never again appear in any of the other Narnia books. The month of March when the trees come back to life after winter, is called March because it's named after Mars in this capacity. So, in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we have the Sun story. This is a solar book. The title of the story alone might give that away to you, because this is a journey towards the dawn. The ship treads the dawn, the rising sun. Another major theme of imagery in the Dawn Treader, which has to do with dragons. Now, why did Lewis put so many dragons in his story? Is it, again, evidence of imaginative confusion, or is there a deeper purpose at work? If you look at the Greek version of the Roman sun god, in Greek mythology he's called Apollo. And one of the things that Apollo was famous for was slaying dragons. He was known as Apollo Sauroctonus. Saura is the Greek word for lizard or dragon. It may have played a part, actually, in Tolkien's choice of the name Sauron or Sauron for his chief villain in The Lord of the Rings. Aslan can undragon Eustace after he's been turned into a dragon. It's a further manifestation of Aslan's solar character in this book. And there are lots of other dragons in this story. The ship itself is shaped like a dragon. They meet the great sea serpent, the fallen stars. A shooting star in medieval times was known as a fire dragon. And there are one or two other dragons too, if you look carefully. So it's a very carefully worked book, beautifully irradiated with solar imagery. The Silver Chair is the moon story. Again, you could guess this from the title, because silver was the metal of the moon. The book is structured to reflect the great divide that existed in medieval cosmology at the orbit of the moon. Above the moon, everything was held to be perfect, certain, immutable, but below the orbit of the moon, everything was subject to doubt and confusion and uncertainty, including that uncertainty of your own mental stability, which is where we get the word lunacy from. Someone who's under the influence of Luna was a lunatic, and Prince Rilian, the lost prince of this story, is found raving like a lunatic 1 hour in every 24 in this story, locked up in his silver chair, and so on and so forth. It's a beautifully worked, incredibly subtle, carefully, artistically worked scheme, which is exactly what we should expect of Lewis, who loved intricacy. He said, intricacy is a mark of the medieval mind. Medieval writers love, he says, to present us with something which cannot be taken in at a glance, with something that looks planless, though all is planned, he says. Everything leads to everything else, but often by very complex paths. And that's precisely what he's done in Narnia too. The story is simple, but the imagery is incredibly complex and carefully worked.
So it's not a hodgepodge.
It's not a hodgepodge.
Michael Ward went to New York and approached Cynthia Reid at Oxford University Press. It was not her usual sort of manuscript. So what did she make of it?
I really thought it was terrific. It was a great read. It really didn't need me to do anything to it at all. And I knew at once that all of these C.S. Lewis fans were just going to be mad about this book. So.
Was that important to you?
Am I a publisher?
Hello, Cynthia.
Hello, it's good to see you.
And you?
How have you been?
Very well, thank you.
Come with me. You know, maybe it's right, or maybe it's not, but he has amassed so much evidence that nobody is going to be able to just say out of hand, oh no, this is nonsense. And I found it persuasive. Thank you. So you're just coming from Wheaton, is that right?
Yes, Wheaton College. Go to talk there.
I think this is a book that's going to stay in print for years and years and years, much like Lewis's own books. And how do the students react? I mean, what is that? Are they really interested to begin with, or?
They are fascinated. You can see their jaws dropping. There are audible gasps as they realise that there is more to Narnia than they ever dreamt of.
That's fantastic. I think that's right. I think that there's a pendulum swing, that people really are sort of sick of that, you know, modern materialistic worldview. And a lot of people are looking for something else, not necessarily something religious, but at least something that has more of that in a sense gives back the mystery to life, in that sense of there being something larger than ourselves.
Planet Narnia was finally published. But what would the Lewis scholars and critics think of the theories it contained?
I was sold as I read Michael's book just by the sheer weight of the research.
It's brilliantly conceived, it's intellectually provocative, and it's rhetorically convincing.
If there's a stone in Lewis scholarship that's unturned, I don't believe it. I think Michael turned pretty much everything.
That doesn't mean in the end that it totally works.
As a result of reading Planet Narnia, I now see that Lewis was up to something much more interesting in these books than I had originally thought, and that I had thought for many years.
I think it's very beguiling, I think it's fascinating, and it intrigues me enormously.
It's like opening a page inside every page of the book. You go back, and your original pleasure in having read the book without this schema in mind is completely undiminished.
It was the holy grail of Lewis scholarship. And here it is.
Whether it holds water, who could say?
In the end, you may or may not agree with his argument, but it's hard not to be charmed by the way in which he goes about making the argument and the evidence that he marshals.
The reason no one has come up with this in the last 50 years is because Lewis represented the tail end of a world in which they gave the proverbial tinker's dam about something like medieval cosmology. So he was the tail end of the last gasp. And then the last 50 years, it's not as if we've had lots of people thinking, well, I wonder if it's the 7 planets of the medieval. No one thinks in those terms anymore.
Maybe not, but they certainly once did. The ancients on every continent knew the planets and the stars intimately, and for at least one very good reason.
Before electricity, what did you do in the evening? The only thing really to occupy your attention outside your very dark house would be the moving lights in the sky. And so it was known to everybody that there were just 7 moving bodies in the sky: the Sun, the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter and Saturn. And all the other stars moved in their constellations, fixed in their constellations. A planet is a wandering star. Planetai in Greek means a wanderer. These days, because of light pollution in cities and towns, we cannot even see the stars. It's not that we're ignorant of them, we're blinded to them.
In actual fact, we all know the planets better than we think. We are surrounded by them, even on a daily basis.
People are surprised to learn that Saturday is named after Saturn, that Sunday is named after the Sun, Monday after the Moon, and the other 4 days of the week after the other 4 planets in this old 7-fold system of the planets, except in those 4 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we use the Norse names for the planetary gods rather than the Roman ones. So Tu is the Norse Mars, Mardi in French, which is where we get Mardi Gras. Wednesday is Woden, who's the rough Norse equivalent of Mercury, Mercredi in French. Thursday, Thor in Norse mythology is the Norse equivalent of Jupiter or Jove. Jeudi in French. And Friday, Freya or Frigg was the Norse goddess equivalent to Venus, Vendredi in French.
This is all very well, but was C.S. Lewis ever really that interested in the planets?
The evidence is everywhere in his life and works. From the age of 5 or 6, he clearly had an interest in the planets. There's a short story that he began at that age called To Mars and Back. The very first poem that he ever published in his school magazine when he was about 12 or so was another poem about Jupiter and Saturn. He loved having conversations with his Uncle Gussie about astronomy, he said. And at that early age, he later said that the planets exercised upon him a peculiar and heady attraction.
So if, as a child, Lewis was fascinated with the planets, wouldn't he grow out of it as a young man? Surely the Great War would have knocked any such romantic nonsense out of him for good.
Still today, in what remains of the trenches from the Great War, there's this terrible sense of loss and emptiness. Lewis looked around the battlefield and saw a wasteland of corpses. He saw close friends die, and he himself was severely wounded. And he used the planets to symbolize this experience. He saw the war in terms of Saturn, the bringer of death and disaster. And after the end of the war, he said, "Of Saturn we know more than enough, but who does not need to be reminded of Jove?"
When Lewis returned to Oxford after the war, his fascination with the planet steadily grew. By the time he became a Christian, the night sky and the heavens meant more to him than they'd ever done before. Now they were part of a meaningful creation, with mystery, purpose and reason.
This is the Kilns, Lewis's house, where he lived for nearly half his life. And he used this room as a study for much of that time, and it was probably in this very room that he actually wrote the Narnia Chronicles. He was a keen amateur astronomer too. He had a telescope on the balcony of his bedroom upstairs, and often talks about enjoying the sights of the planets in the night sky when he's writing to friends. He talks about Jupiter blazing brilliantly at Venus, once with the moon right between them at Christmas time. He thought that was a perfect conjunction of the planets for Christmas time. Majesty and love, with virginity linking the two of them. He loved a trip to the local observatory. He was a keen amateur astronomer.
As Lewis's reputation grew as an expert in medieval literature, it was now through his own work that he began to develop an even deeper interest in all things planetary.
Naturally, as a scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature, Lewis became increasingly aware of how poets like Chaucer and Spenser and Milton and Shakespeare and Dante in particular used these planets as symbols in their poetry.
As he studied further, Lewis became increasingly entranced by the medieval view of the cosmos. He even wrote a groundbreaking book about its wisdom and wonders. But did this mean that he had turned his back on modern science and astronomy in favor of ancient myths and legends?
Lewis clearly believed in modern astronomy. He didn't think that the old astronomy of the medieval period was correct. He clearly says in his book, The Discarded Image, it was not true. He says, readers will be itching to remind me that this old view of the cosmos, which I've spent the last 200 pages discussing for you, had a serious defect. It was not true. I agree, it was not true, Lewis says. But that's not the point. The point is that it was beautiful, that it was a fantastically rich view of the universe. Complex, detailed, patterned, ordered, suffused, irradiated with divine artistry and beauty and purpose. It's a gorgeous view of the cosmos.
So Lewis really did believe that this ancient model of a God-filled universe was closer to the truth of how things are than dead and empty space. For others, however, that whole medieval view of the cosmos was smashed beyond repair by the arrival of a new and shocking invention, the telescope.
The medieval planets, the 7 medieval planets, included the sun and the moon, which surprises people these days. But it ought to be remembered that until about 1600 there were no telescopes. The only things that could be seen in the night sky had to be visible with the naked eye.
As the age of science and the optical lens progressed, man's view of the universe and his own place within it began to change.
Things were treated more and more as matter and mechanism, to be measured, to be weighed, to be recorded according to the data presented by scientific instruments. Once the telescope was discovered, all sorts of new measurements could be made that obviously couldn't be made with the naked eye. So the universe became, as Lewis puts it, delivered into our hands by this scientific revolution.
For Lewis, this increasingly mechanistic view of the cosmos was a poor exchange for the older, God-centered tradition. In his opinion, this materialistic science made the universe a dead and lifeless thing.
I think Lewis was onto something with this idea that the universe had become lifeless, and that nature had become steadily seen more and more as a machine or as a tool which people could use to serve their own ends, rather than something with its own integrity that needed to be respected.
Developments in science and space observation have progressed in leaps and bounds over the last few years. The Royal Observatory at Greenwich even offers a state-of-the-art planetarium to help you explore the vast emptiness of the cosmos. It's all very impressive. Sitting here, staring out at the huge, seemingly empty tracts of space, questions of faith and religion can seem very far away. Surprisingly, the man behind the controls disagrees.
Astronomy in particular raises some very big questions, which obviously have theological implications. And that was one of the things that C.S. Lewis was interested in, was the theological implications of planetary exploration. Science raises interesting philosophical questions, and you can look at and explore those questions from any of a variety of perspectives. They don't all have to be scientific perspectives, and a religious perspective is quite interesting. I mean, what are the implications of things like the Big Bang Theory or our place in the universe? I mean, our understanding at the moment is that we are a small transient species living on a little speck of rock orbiting a rather insignificant average star, and our place in the universe is an important question that drives astronomers to explore and understand the universe, as well as people with other more spiritual interests.
For C.S. Lewis, the spiritual perspective was crucial. He believed in a cosmic Christ and a God who was Lord of all the universe. He thought that mankind could easily be shortchanged, cheated out of the truth, blinded by facts.
Well, I think it's not so much that we're blinded by the facts as that we've been deluded into thinking that those facts presented to us in those reductive books are the only facts available about being and about life. And it's the kind of Pope, isn't it? You know, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring. You know, that actually there's always more. I think the classic, there's a lovely moment in, I think, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where they meet a star who is, you know, also a person in this mythological world. And you know, Eustace says, the classic sort of, you know, Western science thing, he says, in our world, a star is a ball of dust and gas at high temperature exploding in the vacuity of space, or something like that. And the star who's speaking to him returns and says, even in your world, that's not what a star is. It's only what it's made of. You know, and just that, to give children's imagination to realize that to discover what something is made of is not the same thing as knowing what it really is. If a child were even just to apply that to themselves, and to say, even if in my science lesson I've been told that I am, you know, the unwinding of the following code on the genome, and I am, you know, this many chemicals, and I am all these things, that they might have the insight of saying, that's what I'm made of. There's this irreducible mystery of my I amness.
There are a lot of people today who would say that there's no such thing as meaning, really. That we live in a universe. There are atoms, there are elements. Food is made of nutrients, but there's nothing deeper. There's nothing more sacramental. We are just here, and we have to make the best of it. And Lewis is one of those thinkers who would say, no, it's just the opposite. Not only is there meaning in the world, but everything is meaningful.
The modernist worldview starts with the presupposition that the prime thing is inanimate, cold matter just bouncing around with no values, and then comes up with the problem of how, by some weird series of coincidences, this accidental little bit of delusory personhood happened to pop up inside our skulls. That's the way round it goes. So for the modernist worldview, we're always the slightly weird exception to everything else and the problem. Whereas I think Lewis's worldview was to say, let's take this first and most intimate experience, consciousness, relationality, and see if we can make sense of the world from there.
if there is a God who created the universe, then it's not random, that somehow there's a beauty, there's a poetry everywhere, and we'll probably spend eternity discovering it. And one of those things, which I think we're beginning only to discover now at the beginning of the 21st century, is that somehow God has written into the very orbits of planets and stars a kind of poetry, a language which we are only beginning to glimpse. And this book enables us to do that, and enables us to go back to the Bible and say, well, what else is in there? There's more and more meaning. It's bottomless, and frankly, it's exciting.
Exciting for some, a trick of the mind for others. In recent years, a growing band of new atheists have become increasingly outspoken, claiming that there is no God, no ultimate plan or design behind the universe. Professor Richard Dawkins and his fellow atheists would be horrified by Lewis's ideas.
My claim is not that atheists are stupid, but that theism explains more than atheism can. The belief that there is an agent, a creator, who is an agent behind the order and fruitfulness of the world seems to me much more explanatory than treating the matter itself as just brute fact.
Sir John Polkinghorne has been a physicist for over 50 years and an Anglican priest for over 25. He is recognised as one of Britain's top scientists. Dr. Owen Gingrich is an internationally renowned cosmologist. In his opinion, does science lead mankind away from God?
I don't think that science leads you to atheism. Science could just as well lead you to God. You can see wonderful contrasts. Dawkins, from a very religious background, has evolved into an atheist, and he thinks anybody looking at science should do precisely that. You can look at Francis Collins, who headed the US Genome Project, who started out as an atheist and then thought he should, as a scientist, look at the evidence, and became a very staunch Christian.
Moreover, when scientists probe the structure of the world at its deepest levels, they find that it's wonderfully, beautifully ordered. It's a world, if you like, shot through with signs of mind, and it's natural to ask whether that might be a divine, capital M mind, behind that marvelous order.
There are very interesting unanswered questions. Science makes its great progress by very carefully choosing questions that will have answers. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is the universe comprehensible? These are all metaphysical questions, literally meta, beyond physics, beyond physics. And I think those are important questions and worthy of philosophical reflection. But they're just not the kind of questions that science is capable of answering. So we have to keep in mind that science is very good at doing its own thing, but that's not the totality of human thought or human appreciation.
Science is enormously successful in answering the questions that it chooses to address, how things happen. But there are lots of other things happening in the world, and lots of other ways of looking at things. Is there meaning, is there value, is there purpose going on? And science just brackets that out, doesn't pretend to answer those questions. So, the kettle's boiling, the scientific answer is because the gas is burning and it heats the water. But there's also a possible answer, the kettle's boiling because I want to make a cup of tea, and would you like to have one? And we know that we can ask and answer both those questions, the how and the why, if you like, about the same thing. But science only answers one of them.
C.S. Lewis would certainly have agreed with all this. But just how did he balance the tension between the Christian faith and scientific fact?
Lewis once said that if you have religion, it must be cosmic. He wasn't interested in a little tribal deity or a little localized geographical religious practice. He thought that if religion was true, it must encompass everything. It must be universal, from the tiniest, minutest particles up to the highest galaxies. And his favorite psalm was Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God. The firmament proclaims his handiwork. Lewis took that as a beautiful expression of the meaningfulness of the universe.
if there is a destiny for human beings and for the universe itself beyond its death, then it will have to be a transformed destiny. The new creation will have to take the place of the old creation. I think it will do so by God transforming the old creation into the new creation. I think that's begun actually with the resurrection of Christ. I think his tomb was empty because his resurrected body, his glorified body, was the seed event from which the new creation has begun to grow. New creation will have to have different laws of nature. They'll have to be so strongly self-organizing that drift to decay, which thermodynamics says we have in this world, no longer takes place. It seems to me quite credible to believe that God can produce such a world. And interestingly enough, in the 8th chapter of the Epistle to the Romans, Paul talks about the universe, the creation, being in travail until now, waiting the liberty of the children of God. And I think that's an extraordinary picture. We live in a world of travail, of decay, of suffering in that sort of way, but that's not God's final purpose. God's final purpose is the transformation of that world.
Lewis has this marvellous image of Christ being incarnated into the world like a great diver taking a header into a pool and going all the way down into the slimy bottom, the dark and sunless bottom of creation, to pull up a lost precious jewel. And he breaks the surface carrying this precious dripping thing that he went down to find, and that thing is the whole of creation. Christ brings it up in his resurrection. He himself is raised, and as he is raised, the whole creation is raised with him. And the only parallel we have to the resurrection of Christ is the initial creation of the world. The two things are that in the first instance, in the book of Genesis, you have the creation of the world. In the resurrection of Christ, you have the recreation of the world.
Do you agree with Lewis?
Yeah, I agree with Lewis.
Clive Staples Lewis died on the 22nd of November 1963, but his Christian beliefs and ideas continue to influence millions. Perhaps now, that influence is deeper and richer than ever before.
Now this discovery has come to light, I think Lewis would say, what took you so long? Isn't it obvious once you see it? And also, what are you going to do with it now that you've got this discovery? And if it causes us to look at the real universe, not just the universe of the stories, but the actual cosmos in which we're living, and ask deeper questions about it, try and find deeper meanings in it, then I think Lewis would be very satisfied, delighted in fact.